everyone? It's Jacob, PlaysFerDays Bowling, back with another episode of Plays Podcast. I'm joined, as always, by Alex Slothking Martinez. Alex, how are you doing today, buddy?
I'm good, Jacob. How you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for asking. So before we kind of jump into everything, I just wanted to give a heads up on the body division. Due to First Blood reaching the maximum number of forfeits that they are allowed, any games that they would have partook in have been assigned as wins to the opposing team that they would have faced. So that's why you'll kind of see that some of the number of games that have been played is skewed. You'll see some with 7, some with 8. But we promise you that it all works out to the same number of games at the end of the season. So with that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and jump right into what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about the last week's games, week 3's games, as well as looking forward to week 4's games and kind of giving our thoughts on how that's going to go, as well as just, as always, giving our general thoughts and answering some of the questions from the community. Alex, before we jump into everything, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I thought it was just unfortunate that we had this forfeit team. Obviously, it's upset games that we could have seen, and it's just disappointing that we don't get to see more of a competitive division now because it's one player down.
No, absolutely, I agree. But yeah, that's going to be it for the intro. So let's go ahead and jump into Mind Division. So Mind Division has two teams that have kind of forfeited a lot of games, both sitting at the bottom of the table in University of South Alabama and NCSU JV squad. With that being said, though, we do obviously have a pretty top-heavy standings. Leading off with Team Fish Taco sitting at 5-0. Obviously, they missed a game. So they haven't played 6 games due to the happenstance that occurred with Riot servers, hence why they're sitting at 5 instead of 6. But overall, they have looked really strong sitting at that 5-0 position. What have you thought about them, Alex?
I thought they've been looking really strong. It's unfortunate we didn't get to see that extra game, but hopefully we get to see that kind of what they're made of for next week, and because I believe they play Famous Gaming, correct?
Yep, it's going to be the first game of the stream on Thursday.
So, that's a big game right there. So, really going to put these two big powerhouses up against each other and see what happens.
No, absolutely. That's going to be a stellar game. Before we kind of jump into that game and then talk about Famous shortly thereafter, what have you thought about Team Fish Taco as a whole? Have they just been strong across the board in the games that you've seen, or do you think they've just shown some kind of weaknesses that just not a lot of teams have been able to exploit thus far?
Well, we have the game against OTA Cinder for week 3. They looked extremely strong, taking a very clean victory. So when we look at games like that with the middle of the pack, we're getting a good idea of what good this team is when they can set such a big upset. No, I wouldn't say upset. A big victory over a team that's sitting middle of the pack that shows that they're strong. They beat other teams, so it's definitely interesting.
Gotcha. So with that being said, let's kind of talk about the match upcoming this week. They play against Famous Gaming, like we said at the very beginning of the week, followed up by a game against versus Uni Panthers Purple. So both their matches this week are against top of the leaderboard teams. Who do you think Team Fish Taco is going to drop a game this week? Do you think they're going to continue to show the dominance that they've shown thus far that's gotten them their 5-0 lead? Do you think they'll be challenged? What are your thoughts in regards to those two games?
Well, with their week not having that extra game to play, it might be a factor coming in because Famous has played all their games. So we might see that, but at the same time, they look so strong, and at the same time, Famous looks so strong. So I think we have a really great game coming up.
Heard. What about the Uni Panthers Purple match?
Well, we did see Uni Panthers. You're talking about Team Fish Taco versus Uni?
Yeah.
We did see Famous versus Uni this week. And then to see Team Fish Taco, I would like to see where they stand with Uni. because Famous was able to take a convincing victory. Can they do the same, or this will kind of be an indicator of how they sit in the standings?
Heard. So obviously, uh, between all the games that we have this week, I would probably say that the two Team Fish Taco matches are the matches to watch, which is why we're kind of focusing so heavily on these two matches. So go ahead and give me your predictions for Team Fish Taco versus Famous Gaming, the first game of the stream.
I do believe that Team Fish Taco will take a victory over Famous Gaming. And I also I think they're going to be going 2-0 this week, also versus Uni Panther Purple.
Heard. I personally think Famous Gaming will probably is the only team I think that will take a game off Team Fish Taco Tempest. So I am going to give them this one. I think Famous Gaming is going to kind of exploit how cocky Team Fish Taco Tempest is probably feeling right now because they are sitting undefeated, and they
Well,
really haven't been challenged yet.
where do you think the strength lies in the two teams? Like, where do you think they kind of center their strengths around?
That's hard to say. Team Fish Taco, from what I've seen, has played fairly consistently across the board. They haven't really looked too weak in too many areas, but I do think it was because, like I said, they haven't really been all that challenged yet. I know from the games that we have seen, their top laner has played, those really aggressive early game champions in the Renekton and the Pantheon. Their jungler he's looked pretty diverse. He's played a different champion almost every time, I believe. Mostly in the engagers, so he's kind of their primary engage. Standard, mage mid lane, so nothing really to talk about there. And then bot lane, you never really have to do anything fancy with the bot lane, just a consistent, DPS AD carry with a utility support. So I mean, they've looked pretty standard, and they've looked good doing standard. As for Famous Gaming, besides that one dropped game, they've looked fairly good. I mean, again, this is another team that, from what I've seen, has just been standard, no questions asked. Why? No reason to try and fix something that isn't broke,
Yeah, of course.
So I would just say that where I think that they can exploit each other, it's going to be how they play around objectives. That's always the biggest thing for me when it comes to two standard teams really matching up against each other, is how they look playing around objectives. Both teams, or rather Team Fish Taco hasn't really been pushed in that regard, and I think Famous Gaming obviously is pretty upset that they do have that one loss on their record, and I think that they're really going to try to push Team Fish Taco Tempest to the limit, and try to force some weaknesses or force some mistakes out of them, and I think that that's where Famous Gaming will end up taking it.
All right.
As for the second game, I mean, I don't think that there's that much of a skill difference between Team Fish Taco and Famous Gaming. I think that they're pretty relatively similar in strengths, and I think that kind of spells doom for Uni Panthers Purple, which is why I do think Team Fish Taco Tempest is going to end up going 1-1.
Well, when I look at Team Fish Taco, I kind of look at their bot lane. They have a very strong AD carry. They have a very strong support. He roams a lot. He's setting up the engage. He's playing these strong carry. He played, I think, Pike week 1. He's playing Thresh week 3. I mean, these are playmaking supports, and he's doing a great job on them. But when I look at Famous, they play really heavy on their top side because they think that their bot lane can kind of match up well, and then they're getting huge leads in the top side. So for these two teams, I think they have very different sides of the map to focus on to get their leads.
Gotcha. So you're looking more like an individual, not individual, but you're looking more of like a laning standpoint versus I was looking more at the mid to late game setup.
No, of course, yeah, and objective play is obviously going to be important. Where are you moving your bot lane after Dragon taken or Rift is taken? It's very important to see where we're seeing in those mid-game spikes.
No, absolutely. Um, so let's transition now to Famous Gaming. Um, excuse me. You spoke a little bit about their ability to kind of play topside and utilize the strength of their top laner and just kind of leave their bot lane to match up. Excuse me again, and skill check their opponents. So their second opponent this week is Dawn Revenant, a team who we've seen get these massive leads and then falter in the execution of the end of the game. Where do you think that? How do you think that matchup's going to go? Obviously, you're predicting Famous to take an L against Team Fish Taco. So, are you expecting Famous to then be able to bounce back in that later matchup against Dawn Revenant and take that win?
Well, it really depends because when we look at that top lane matchup, they're very scrappy. They're going to be fighting a lot. And it's kind of whoever's coming up on those trades and can convert that. And I think that Famous just converts their leads better. So if they are going to be getting those leads, I feel like they have a better job converting that in the mid game, getting their leads, taking Baron, getting control. So I think that's where the teams kind of separate in skill and why we're seeing more success come from Famous.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I mean, that covers Team Fish Taco and Famous, so let's now move on to the third seed, Uni Panthers Purple. Obviously, you predicted them to take an L against Team Fish Taco. Their other opponent for this week is NCSU JV Squad. Obviously, NCSU is a team we haven't really seen a lot of due to a lot of the forfeits they've had. They did just finally solidify their roster. Getting their final player cleared to play. What are your thoughts about NCSU? Obviously, you haven't seen anything of them yet, but what are your thoughts? What can they do to kind of come out and surprise everyone and start getting some of these upset wins based on how you've seen everyone else?
Come to play. I mean, that's the most important thing. You got to come to play. And the thing is, it makes it so fun for these bottom teams is that you're just looking for that one victory to kind of snatch it from these people. And not to mention, it's week 3. We have so much more to play that it's not over yet. You know, you can have an undefeated going on. It's not impossible. So I hope they can get their act together and get some games played because I want this to be more of an exciting division to watch moving on.
Yeah, instead of us just watching forfeit after forfeit after forfeit.
Because honestly, in this division, there really wasn't much to talk about this week other than maybe the stream games, and that was kind of unfortunate.
No, absolutely. I 100% agree. So let's move on from Uni Panthers Purple. Obviously, because of the unknown that is NCSU, we are both, I'm guessing, taking Uni Panthers Purple in that first match of the day against...
Well, I still want to talk about Uni just for their week 3 performance because... they got a huge upset against OTA Cinder, and we talked about this last week. This was one of those strong teams that we kind of said they have the potential, but they just need to follow up and get those wins. And they showed that they can do it with OTA Cinder. They completely dominated this game. It was kind of back and forth at first, but they transitioned their leads from the mid game and were able to convert it to other things on the map and cleanly ended the game against OTA Cinder.
Heard. I mean I also watched that game and they definitely looked very promising after you kind of got out of the laning phase and they were finally able to start creating those leads, which was good because I think last week if you had asked us who the top 3 teams were, we both kind of said it's Team Fish Taco, Famous Gaming, and OTA Cinder, and then Panthers is just behind the top 3, and it's going to be about if they can take games off these top 3. So it was really nice to see them finally be able to kind of crack that top 3, but it was unfortunate that they then were unable to do so against the likes of Famous Gaming, who then took them down.
But with OTA Cinder taking a double loss this week, I mean, that
gave
just
Panthers
that
the
just
ability
puts
to
them
pass
right
them.
up. And now we're at the point where it's anyone's game for next week.
No, absolutely. I mean, you now have these two teams, Cinder and Purple, sitting tied up for that third seed spot, and it's about who can break that tie. And right now, obviously, Uni Panthers purple does have that advantage with that win that they took over OTA Cinders.
And on the point of OTA Cinder, I don't think it's over for them. They've been doing so well up until this point, and I think they just need to brush off these losses and kind of get back to how they were playing in the first 2 weeks, because they're a very strong team, and I think they're going to be able to make it to contest for that third seed spot.
Heard. No, I agree. I think OTA Cinder is a very talented team, and it's just about bouncing back from such a rough week. So I mean, we've kind of already touched on it. OTA Cinder. This week they play against Dawn Revenant and New Meta Esports. Where do you kind of put the ball in the court of these two opponents? Do you think OTA Cinder is just gonna slam dunk this home, or do you think that it's gonna be a much more challenging week for them again?
Well, I mean, you never know right now, because New Meta is, I believe, the team that took down Famous for their first loss. Correct?
I will double check that for you.
I believe that's the team.
New Meta Esports. New Meta Esports was the team that took the win off Famous.
But at the same time, Dawn Revenant beat New Meta Esports. So these teams, they've shown that they can compete with the top. Are we going to see that against OTA Cinder? Are they going to go 2-0 again, or 0-2 again for next week? Or are they going to find a 2-0 and get ahead of the pack, keep up the contention for third seed?
No, absolutely. And that's always the hardest question, is how do you bounce back after an 0-2 week? Because it's honestly one of the hardest things to do, because, you're just so frustrated, with your performance from the week before, that you
get the pre-tilt.
Yeah, it eats at you, and it's one of the hardest things to talk about from a gamer perspective, because no one wants to admit that you're going into that next week still feeling those losses, wondering what you could have done different to avoid that 0-2 week. But now OTA Cinder has that challenge in front of them, and they are going up against more lower half of the standing teams, but they are teams who have taken wins off of other teams in New Meta Esports, beating Famous Gaming, and then Dawn Revenant again. We've talked about it multiple times. They had a 9K gold lead against one of the upper echelon teams and still managed to lose. But it shows that they're capable of getting these leads.
It's converting it.
Yeah. So I think OTA Cinder definitely has their work cut out for them coming back. But at the same time, it'll be important that they can show, like, hey, we're above these two lower echelon teams, and we're here to prove it, that we're still one of the top 4 teams, and vying for that top 3 spot.
Yep, I totally agree.
Okay, so let's talk about Dawn Revenant then. Obviously, last week there was an issue with one of their players. It didn't get resolved in a way that Dawn Revenant was happy about, and it kind of forced them into a forfeit for their second game of the day. Or rather, fortunately for Dawn Revenant, though, the team that they ended up forfeiting against was a team that was also forfeiting that week due to issues of their own. So it counts as kind of half a point for both squads. So now they're sitting at 2-3-1, and this is one of those teams that we keep bringing it up, but we keep bringing it up because we want to see them convert those leads into wins. What do you think that they need to do moving forward to start converting those leads that they've got into wins?
Well, obviously, first of all, I hope they get everything figured out so they don't have to take another, forfeit, because it's very unfortunate that they have to sit in this kind of position when they could easily jump back right into the standings and be a top team. But what I see from Dawn Revenant is scrappy fights, and if they clean that up, have clean drafts, and have an idea of how they want to play out their game, I feel like they're going to be so successful because they have the talent to play that early game. We've seen it. They've had the gold leads. What are you doing with it? How are you converting it? Are you having clean fights? Are you too split up? Look at your games. Rewatch your games. So that's my advice. I think they can easily fix this. Not over, but we're gonna have to keep watching them.
Heard. So you think it's just about identifying those win conditions and being able to execute on them correctly?
Of course.
Gotcha. Heard. I mean, the last team we really have anything to talk about today would be New Meta Esports, obviously, because the other two teams have 4 forfeits under their belt each, so not a lot of game consumption for us there. So, what are your thoughts on New Meta Esports? I mean, again, it's another team that we haven't really seen a lot of, but has I say that in the sense that they're another team that has only 5 games played, because their game that they haven't played has been against Team Fish Taco, one of the top teams, or the top team rather. So in the games that we have seen, what have you thought of them thus far?
Just again, it's more of just converting on your late game. Like we're seeing some early game gold leads, and it just seems like we kind of get stuck in a bad pathing, get caught out, and then you're seeing the downfall of the early game. You're not drafting for what looks to be a late game comp, and it comes back to bite you, and then you end up with huge gold deficits that you can't make up, and you can't even have a fighting chance once it gets so far out of your favor.
Well, agreed. And I mean, again, this is a team that has taken down our second seed team, so it's another situation where the talent's there, but the execution just seems off.
But when you're talking about taking down top seed teams and then losing to a bottom team like Dom Revenant, where you're kind of in the middle with, you can't let that happen, because now it's even harder to climb that ladder.
Gotcha. Heard. Well, we've kind of given our thoughts on this upcoming week's games, like the 2 main ones that we'll really have our eyes focused on. And I think that about covers it for Mind Division. So let's go ahead and move on over to Body Division. So Body Division obviously had the loss of First Blood due to the forfeit issue. What are your thoughts on last week? What are your thoughts on this? Yeah, let's just start there. Let's start on your thoughts from last week, starting with the number 1 team in the division, SPK Embers.
SPK is looking strong. We talked about them versus Grim Legion Havoc. They did amazing. They just controlled the entire game. In my, like top lane had a few scrappy fights, but Sir Razel just kept him so locked down in the top lane that it gave I Don't Jungle the ability to walk around the map and make plays, shutting down the mid laner, getting sleepily ahead. And when you get him ahead, he does roams, he goes all over the map, he's supporting team, he's on Karma this week. We played a Karma game, and I mean, no deaths, huge KP, and their bot lane 80 carry was so fed that with the extra support, there was nothing that they could do in these team fights.
I heard. So this week, let's take that and transition to who they play again who they play this week. They play the likes of Essentia Storm, and Kevin and Co. We were fairly high on Essentia Storm when we were talking about them off stream earlier, or off podcast earlier. How do you think that matchup's going to go, and kind of where do you favor? Obviously, I think you favor SPK Embers, but why do you favor SPK Embers in this matchup?
Well, I mean, look at how good Essentia Storm's looking. They are just they're doing a great job. They took a game off of Arian. I'll get this eventually.
Hilarion Gaming Block.
Whatever.
Hilarion.
AGB, that's what I'm going to call you from now on. Congratulations. Essentia Storm just clean housed them. Looked amazing. I mean, it was like they were versing a straight bottom end team. I didn't know what was going on with AGB, but essentially Storm looks strong. And if they're looking that strong come into next week, SPK might have a fight on their hands because I mean there was domination in that game.
Hard.
But of course, SPK, you can't take it away from them. They're undefeated. They're undefeated for a reason. These guys play strong, team fight strong, play objectives strong, vision control amazing. They're not wasting time in the late game. They're not swimming around the mid lane looking for picks. They're controlling the map with macro and then getting what they need to get the Baron, get the Dragons, get the win.
Hard. Respect. The other opponent that they have this week is Kevin and Co. What do you think about Kevin and Co. and where they match up? Because Kevin and Co. is sitting. If you remove First Blood from the equation, they're sitting at 2-4. But with the situation with Kevin and Co., they are sitting, or with First Blood rather, they are sitting at 4-3. So how do you think Kevin and Co. will match up against SPK Embers? What can they do to take the win?
Kevin and Co., I believe they had a loss to Insanity this week. And
yes.
It was just kind of unfortunate, they were super far ahead and then they just kind of threw the game at some point. And for me, not looking very convincing when you're talking about going up against SPK next week, not with how they are playing now.
Heard. Well, then let's move on to the second seeded team, Alarion Gaming Black. Alarion Gaming Black obviously coming off of a 2-0 week. No, 1-1 week, because their loss was to essentially a Storm, as you said, yeah. This week they take on the likes of, I gotta find them. They only have one game this week, and that would be against Insanity Gaming. What are your thoughts on that matchup?
Insanity Gaming, I mean, Insanity was looking good against Kevin, so where are they going to sit when we're talking about essentially a Storm kind of sitting where Insanity is right now, taking games from AGB. So are they going to take a game from them? Alarion, I think they got a win against Grim Legion for week 3. Was that a forfeit, or was that a game they played?
Which one? I'm sorry.
Alarion Gaming Black versus Grim Legion. It was a forfeit.
Correct.
So they didn't actually play this strong team. They got that victory from them. So we didn't really get to see if they would have went 0-2 last week.
Which is sad, of course. I think we both have said it multiple times now on this podcast, but it is so frustrating for us when a game that we are excited to see, or any game at all really, has these forfeits, because it makes it so much harder to tell where these teams lie in the standings.
Yeah, so I don't think that Alarion Black was looking good last week. They got that win. That's good for them. They're second seed right now. But will they keep it? And that's the question. They need to, look back at their games and figure out what's been going on, because they have a lot to fix.
No, 100%, I agree. What are your thoughts regarding what are your thoughts regarding essentially Storm? Because I know you were pretty high on them coming off of that win against against Alarion Gaming, because of how clean they did look. Where do you think that they're going to end up after this week, where they play against the likes of Insanity and SPK Embers? I know you kind of said you favor SPK Embers in that match, but
well, when I look at Essential Storm, I see that they're doing a great job playing team fights, playing objectives, but their early game is lacking. And so if they can clean up the early game, I think they're going to have a much easier time dealing with teams like SPK Embers and taking advantages from the lower end teams like Insanity, not making it such a close game. So if we can see that from them, I think they're going to have an easy way to the top.
Heard. No, I agree with that. I think that we've kind of seen it from multiple different teams. You're either struggling in the early game or you're struggling in converting your leads that you got in the early game. And when you compare that against a team like SBK Embers, who does seem to have that kind of complete package where they can convert their wins or convert their early game leads into wins, and also don't have that weakness of that bad early game. I think that it's hard for us to really take any team over SPK Embers as a result, and that's not us. That's not us knocking essentially a Storm. That's just us singing the praises of Embers. But in their match against Insanity, how do you expect Essentia Storm to do?
I I I see Essentia having a good team fight comp set up. They do a good draft, and they take the victory. Does Insanity have a chance? Yes, of course. They've been playing much better than we've seen in the earlier weeks, and I've enjoyed watching them. So hopefully it's a good battle, and it kind of puts us where we need to be for that middle of the pack.
Or what do you think of Grim Legion Havoc coming in this week? Obviously, had that unfortunate forfeit against Alarion Gaming Black that they could have possibly won and kept their second seed, third seed, or third seed spot, depending. Um,
For me, this team coming in, they fought SPK Embers. Their early game wasn't really drafted for an early game, but they kind of tried to play around that and still pick fights, and it ended up really blowing up the game. So they were bullied a lot by this really strong early game team, and I'd like to see some earlier scaling champions so that they can get that early advantage and not be set up in such a bad position. But it's also unfortunate that they had to forfeit a game, putting them way lower in the standings than we predicted them to be at.
yeah, I know last week we were coming off them saying that they were probably going to be a top three team, no questions asked, and now not only because of this forfeit, but also because of their loss earlier on in the day, it knocked them down to this fourth seed spot, and that's not something we were expecting for this team.
And hopefully they can kind of get back that mentality and pick up these games because they are a great team. They've shown a lot for us, and I'm still excited to see what else they can do. Next week, I think they have games against Mediocre at Best and First Blood Esports, which is an automatic win.
Yep.
But again, don't throw it against Mediocre, and we'll see some contention up there.
For sure. Up next is obviously Insanity Gaming. We've touched on them a little bit because we've talked about both their opponents in Alarion Gaming Black and Essentia Storm. But this is another one of those teams where without the forfeits, they'd be sitting at 2-3 instead of the 4-3 that they now sit at because of the two forfeit wins. Same as Grim Legion Havoc and the same as Kevin and Co. So, I mean, what are your thoughts regarding... I'm sorry, I cannot get comfortable in my chair right now. What are your thoughts about Insanity Gaming? What do you think that they need to do to really take it to the next level and start finding these wins on a more regular basis?
Honestly, I think it's a communication thing because the team is getting these team fight wins and they're picking up these surprise victories, but it's not like it was ever in their favor. They had to make an upset to get these victories. And it's because they're getting picked off a lot. I saw a lot of times the mid laner for Insanity was getting picked out all by himself. No real team fight to be had, no real flank to be had, and still you're just caught out and making it a disadvantage for your whole team. So if they clean up some of that, bad communication, whether where are we actually going to be in the map, what are we contesting, what are we playing for right now, those are the questions they need to ask themselves. Clean up that, and I think you got some better games.
Heard. I mean, I don't disagree with that. From what I've seen from Insanity Gaming, there is kind of a lot of walking around aimlessly. That it has kind of been their downfall a couple times. So I definitely don't agree with that. or don't disagree with that rather. Um, so let's move on to Kevin and Co. We touched on them very briefly, obviously. Um, but they play against Grim Legion Havoc and Mediocre at Best this week. I'm sorry, I'm looking 1 week ahead. They play against Mediocre at Best and SPK Embers. Obviously, we consider the match against SPK Embers not necessarily dead in the water, but definitely an uphill battle for them. What are your thoughts regarding their match against Mediocre at Best? Because obviously last week I voiced fairly strong opinions regarding Mediocre at Best, so we'll touch on them next.
So we're talking about Kevin right now?
Yeah.
I just was, a little disappointed that they took their gold lead and kind of threw it away. And it's stuff like that will get you into these tough spots in the standings. And a team that might be a little farther ahead right now has to play catch up. So I really want to see what they do for next week to clean up the mistakes they made and maybe have a better mindset coming into what they want to do come late game macro. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of these higher end teams that are sitting high in the standings right now. Incredible macro play, and we're just getting some lackluster in the middle of the pack and below, and that's kind of what's changing the skill cap for these teams.
Heard. I mean, we already kind of touched on it earlier. I think when we were talking about Kevin Co very briefly, was the whole, it's about converting your early game leads into wins. And again, it's so disappointing for us from not even a spectator standpoint, but as competitors. It's so sad to see them, have these leads and just kind of let them fall to the wayside.
Obviously that happens. No, you have those weeks, and it's how you come up off of that. Do you let this be how you're seen, or do you kind of come off of these bad weeks, shake it off, and play better next week? What are you doing to coach yourselves better in these positions and, learn from these games?
Yeah. All right, so up next is obviously what people are going to consider my least favorite team, in Mediocre at Best. And obviously I say that jokingly. I have no problems with Mediocre at Best, besides maybe their name. But sorry, no hate towards Mediocre at Best. Obviously, I'm just kind of, I like playing with the name game. I think it's fun for me. But Mediocre at Best showed us two very different styles of draft. I think that they really heard our criticism and tried to not have that wonky style draft.
I liked the draft this week. I thought it was a lot better.
In which game?
In versus SBK.
That was their second game.
That was Kled, Jarvan, Kiana, Swain, Nautilus, which I think is a very strong composition.
So my only thing I would argue about that with is you have no siege potential. Your siege potential with that composition is getting a pick. Or you're just straight diving a turret. And against a team like SPK Embers, I don't want to see dive turrets. I want to see you. I want to see you take advantage of extended range. I would have loved to see. I don't remember if Caitlyn was banned. I don't remember if Kaisa was banned. Actually, I probably wouldn't have liked to see Kaisa. I probably would have liked to see Tristana or Caitlyn paired up with something like either Swain support or Nautilus support, and really take advantage of that range game, because I think range is so integral in League of Legends when it comes to sieging down turrets. And we've seen it multiple times at the World Championship even, where these teams are picking these really lack of siege potential compositions and getting exploited for it, because they either win the team fight or they don't have any siege whatsoever, because they have to get all these kills to even take an objective. And you have zero Baron taking potential, you have zero tower taking potential unless it's off of a win of a team fight, and I just don't like those styles of compositions. And I get why they did it. SPK Embers does fight quite a bit in their wins, but it doesn't change the fact that unless you're hard stomping those fights and basically clean acing them every time, you have zero siege or objective taking potential whatsoever. And that was my issue with that draft. Their first draft, however, the one against Insanity Gaming, I liked that draft. It was very simple. I was sad to
You're
see
gonna have
them.
to refresh me on that draft. What was that draft?
That draft was the one where they had Janna support. It was Ornn, Elise, Syndra, Lucian, and Janna.
Okay.
So it was a very simplistic draft with a lot of potential in all stages of the game, but they ended up getting outplayed at kind of every stop and turn by the likes of Insanity Gaming. So that was sad to see, but I was also much happier with the draft. There, it didn't feel like they were trolling like it did that first game that we saw them draft with the Ashe support. Don't get me wrong. That second game against SBK Embers, I liked their draft more than I did the first time we saw them play.
I think what we're trying to get at is that this is an improvement that we're seeing, and I'm happy to see that this improved, because this draft is so much better than what we saw week 1 and week 2. Or I'm sorry, they only had the week 2 game, correct? But
Correct.
Either way, so this is so much better. Even yes, they might have drafted against a very strong team. Maybe not their best idea to draft this comp, but we know that they are drafting these kind of comps now, and we can kind of see them thinking about what they're doing instead of just going at it.
No, I 100% agree.
And unfortunately, they actually were 2-0, up 2 kills early game to SBK, and from there it kind of just went downhill. A lot of weird roams in the river got caught out, weird team fights that didn't need to take place so early. So I just was kind of upset with this one. I feel like they had that chance and it kind of like slipped through their fingers a little bit. I think they need to work on, really just player by player work is needed here, because that's where I'm kind of seeing some problems.
Gotcha. So you don't think it's a team cohesion issue? You think it's an individual thing?
I think that you have to clean up your individual play if you're ever going to make it to the team fighting stages.
Gotcha. I mean, again, and I know it sounds like I'm harping at mediocre at best. I'm really not. It's coming from a place of someone who really genuinely cares about the draft phase. I think the draft phase is the most important part of the game.
I agree.
But at the same time, obviously, this is a team that, once again, we said it last week and we'll say it again, we think they have this potential in them to be one of these top of the standing teams, but we're just not seeing the level of execution that we would like to from them, along with, obviously, from my standpoint, some of the kind of wonky drafts.
Well, I mean, based on the teams they're fighting right now, they're just not executing to par, and it just shows. So whatever they need to do to fix it, we need to see them contest with even the low end teams to get a convincing place in the standings.
Gotcha. All right, well then let's go ahead and move on and start talking about the 2 matches of the week that we're the most excited to kind of see come out from this week. What were your 2 that you were looking at? I think both of us kind of have Essentia Storm versus SPK Embers marked on our calendar.
I'm very excited for that game. Obviously, Essentia Storm looking good, SPK looking amazing. Can Essentia Storm pull off an upset? Because we had so many upsets this week that it's feeling like Essentia's time to shine. And will they be the first ones to take them off that totem pole?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So, I mean, before we kind of mark that second game as our game to watch this week in this division, what are your thoughts on that match? Who do you think is going to end up taking it in the end?
I'm going to be the fanboy and go for Essentia Storm. I think they're looking really good, and I would just like to see some competitive play go on in this division. So I'm going to give it to Essentia.
I'm going to stick with the essentially old reliable in this group, actually.
Old reliable,
yeah. I'm going to go with SPK Embers. SPK Embers has looked phenomenal thus far, and I have confidence in them to continue on their path to victory. Do I think they're gonna? Do I think it's
obviously
gonna be
taking
14-0 the dream? No, I just think that they're gonna take this one.
obviously now SBK looking amazing, so it's nothing to take away from them. But I would just love to see the upset, going off of how much I've seen Essentia really grow throughout this division.
For sure. So what's kind of your second game to watch then of this division? For me, it's a lot of these teams that we expect a lot out of versus these teams we don't expect a lot out of, and
Well,
it's hard to find that second one. But that being said, if I had to pick a second one personally, I would actually probably say either I would say one of the Insanity games in Essentia Storm versus Insanity or Larian Gaming Black versus Insanity.
I'm actually gonna move focus and kind of go towards AGB versus Insanity, just for the fact that when I look at these two teams, those are the teams that were like kind of need work, weren't looking so amazing, and I want to see if they come back and who's gonna take that victory and look better that next week.
Heard. So I mean, we both kind of picked Larian Gaming Black versus Insanity Gaming as our second match to watch. Who do you think takes that one then? Where do you think the ball falls on that one?
Well, if Alarian comes back and wants to stay strong in this division, they gotta take this game. So we'll see if they can take this rough week, turn it around. But right now they look like the favor for the next week.
Heard. I'm actually, again, I hate to be disagreeable. I'm gonna go with Insanity Gaming. I think Insanity Gaming is coming off of a pretty clean 2-0 week.
I thought we were friends.
We're coming off of Insanity's coming off of a pretty clean 2-0 week, so I think I got to give it to them. They're definitely on the up and up, and I would like to see them continue.
No, of course. I just would like to see some cleaner games out of them. So hopefully they can give it to us and give us a really strong match to watch.
Heard. All right, so let's move on to the Soul Division.
The good old Soul Division.
Yeah, we still have two teams sitting at that undefeated record in Recon 5 and Zephyr Esports.
Next week.
No, it ends this week. What do you mean next week? It ends this week.
Well, I say next week as in
later this week. Yeah, no, I got you.
Later this week, of course.
No, I understand what I get what you're putting down.
Can we act like we recorded this on Sunday?
Yeah, I know, right? No, but in all seriousness, let's go ahead and kick it off. Let's start with Zephyr Esports. Last week I think that a lot of people heard me say that they're a relatively clean team, and then we saw them have a really scrappy game this week on stream.
Versus Rated R.
Yeah. But I don't think that takes away from they're much cleaner than their counterparts in Recon 5 in the sense where Recon 5 it seems like you always waiting for the other shoe to drop with Recon 5, where it seems like they just explode out of the gate right away, and it just seems like a constant right hook to the face essentially with Recon 5, where you're just waiting for them to finally miss that punch and go down as a result, versus Zephyr when they were, even though the game was much scrappier than some would have been led to believe by what I said, they still looked somewhat clean in the sense where you didn't feel like if one thing went wrong, the game was over for them.
Yep, I gotcha.
I mean, what are your thoughts though on Zephyr? Because let's start with them.
I mean, they convincingly won against Rated R. I mean, you had 7-0 Oriana, you had a 7-1 Pantheon. They're up like 4K gold from their oppositions. That's incredible. So to take that kind of strength and push it to a victory, it was a 23-minute game. I mean, it was dominance.
Yeah.
So to say scrappy, I mean, I could see some of that it was a little less clean than we've seen from them, but they completely dominated the game. They walked it down. They finished the game strong.
Gotcha.
And then we kind of expected that, though, of course, from Rated R not looking the best so far in the standings. Obviously, a lot of work to do there.
I mean, yeah, poor Rated R. Let's pour one out for Rated R.
Well,
Having to face.
come on, I mean, 2 top teams in 1 week.
Yeah, it's never a fun story, my friend.
But at the end of the day, they're the ones you gotta beat. So it's not gonna go away. It's not something you shoo off. You gotta be able to take these victories from these strong teams, because they could beat all these people and still get these huge losses from these top player teams and can knock them too far down.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what are your thoughts on? Let's transition over to Recon 5. I mean, thoughts. Recon 5 still looks strong.
I didn't get to personally watch their games, but I know they got a win against Rated R Esports. We again predicted that, and then they got a win against UT Esports Blue, which was a middle of the pack team that we talked about being very strong last week. And then they ended up getting 2 losses.
Yeah, I mean, UT Esports coming off of an O2 week. I mean, we can't stress enough how dominant Zephyr and Recon 5 have looked in these last 3 weeks. I don't think that's possible, because they clearly have been head and shoulders above the rest of the pack. But again, we've been waiting for them to really go at each other, and we get to see it for the final game of the first round robin. You know, what are your thoughts regarding that match specifically? Because I don't want to move on and talk about the rest of the teams until we cover the elephant in the room, because this is the elephant in the room.
I mean, we talked about it last week. These 2 big powerhouses finally getting in Clash of the Titans. So who's going to lead the pack coming out? And obviously they play 2 games each week, so they could both receive losses at the same time and still end up tied in the standings.
Yeah, I mean, so we get blessed. We get to see this matchup twice this season. Once this week and then once on the final game of the season. What are your kind of thoughts? I mean, do we expect these 2 teams to split 1-1 over these 2 games? Do we expect,
Well, that's actually what I want to get your thoughts on, because yes, we have Recon 5 versus Zephyr, which is a huge game. One's going to come on top of the other. But then let's look at their next week, the same week games. Jet Black versus Recon 5. Again, a strong team, had a 1-1 this week, was looking a little iffy in their first game, but was able to bring it back. And then Uni Panthers Gold, who have been looking amazing this week, versus Zephyr. So are they going to get those victories? Are we going to see them go 1-1 for the week? Are we going to see a team go 0-2 on these top Titans?
So first and foremost, let's pick out who we think is going to take the win in Recon 5 versus Zephyr. Does the other shoe finally drop for Recon 5? Do they finally miss that knockout punch that bites them in the ass and let Zephyr take the win? Or do we expect Zephyr to come out with very controlled and clean but dominant game?
I personally still got to give it to Recon 5. Just based on what we've seen so far, I think they've had the better team in whole, but I mean it's very close. So, what are your thoughts going into that game?
I mean,
because this is really going to base around the early game.
I'm going to bring everyone
draft the early game.
No, absolutely. And I'm going to kind of take everyone back to MSI real quick.
Oh God.
We had if you go back to MSI, you remember that there was a clash of styles in SKT versus G2, where it was we had this really explosive team versus this really controlled, dominant team. And a lot of people had SKT going into that, and I want to take Zephyr. I want to be on Zephyr's side because I believe that dominant, clean games where you just put your opponent down and you say, no, this is my turf, I'm winning it no matter what you do, I think is a very admirable trait, and I think it's why SKT has 3 world championships. But I have to give it to Recon 5. Right now, in the current meta, I don't think that control style is enough to win you games anymore. I think you need that oomph factor, and I think Recon 5 has that factor.
And how do they decide draft startups?
Whoever's at the top of the bracket is blue
These
side.
teams are tied.
No, like top of the
top
bracket.
of the actual bracket.
Yeah.
Got you.
So Recon 5 is blue side this time around.
Okay. Because I mean, those are also very important when we talk about draft pick against these two teams. Is having first pick the better option versus having 2 picks off of the first pick?
I think counter pick is most important, especially at the level of play that we've seen from these two teams. I think that if they can get a good counter pick on the mid laner of Recon 5, I think Zephyr Esports will definitely stand a really good chance to take this one. Again, I'm not counting Zephyr out by any means necessary. This is a game where, I mean, for me personally, it's like 49%, 51%. You know what I mean?
Well,
it's right there.
And when we talk about one team being explosive and one team being, very collected in their way of playing, that's not set in stone, of course, because
every team can play anyway.
You thought Zephyr had more of a more explosive game this week versus what they normally would have.
Yeah.
So when we talk about that, are they gonna be matching Recon, or is Recon gonna play more of a slow, laid back game and kind of do a clean victory? Or is so we're gonna get so many different ideas, and we're gonna have to see how draft phase goes. I think don't miss this game. Grab something to eat, sit down, watch the draft, watch the whole damn draft, because it could be important.
No, absolutely. So we've kind of both pinged Recon 5 as the winner of that one, but obviously, as I stated, it's very close for both of us, with a lot of unknown factors, just because everybody is capable of changing up their style. So let's move on down the list now to Uni Panthers Gold. Uni Panthers Gold coming off of that 2-0 week. I believe it was 2-0. Let me double check.
It was. They also won against Team Solo Kill.
Yep. That 2-0 week, which catapulted them. They were sitting at 2-2. They weren't in sole possession of third seed. They were tied with 2 others for that third seed spot.
We did have Team Jet Black. We had Panthers Gold, and we had UT
Blue. Yeah.
So it got explosive, though. We talked about what's going to happen to this middle of the pack, and it explodes this week. We have Uni Panthers Gold, who go third seed, I believe. Yeah, third seed.
Third seed, 2-0.
Jet Black still kind of sitting where they were.
Split
but UT
1-1,
Blue taking a 2-0, 0-2 this week?
Yeah, they all went a different record this week, which is exactly what we were afraid was going to happen.
So now they're sitting with Asian Invasion, where we said Asian Invasion not looking very strong, but could pull off some upsets. And they do. They upset UT Blue, giving, Panthers Gold this chance to skyrocket in the standings. And we talked about this. Panthers Gold, good-looking team. They took down Jet Black, which was another middle-of-the-pack team. So we got our answers kind of where we're sitting. And then they got a game coming up against Zephyr. So they're going to really answer the questions next week to, are they going to play at this top level with these Titans, or are they going to sit in the middle of the pack and just secure themselves that seed to playoffs?
Yep. No, absolutely. And that's, I think, the biggest question is, what does Uni Panthers do from here? You're coming off of a 2-0 week where, you beat one of the 2 teams that was tied with you. and then you made sure that you beat that lower seeded team to really show like, hey, I'm not here to drop games against teams that I absolutely shouldn't drop games against,
And I
which is
thought it was very
important.
convincing.
Oh, absolutely, it was very
Against
convincing.
Black. So for me, that was like a little shocking because we had them all so close together with their games, and then we saw this really explosive game out of Panthers, and it kind of threw me off. I wasn't ready for such, strong play against another team that showed so much prowess.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, and that let's use that as kind of our catapult over to Team Jet Black, who did suffer a fairly convincing defeat at the hands of the Panthers Gold.
And then we
Where do
go.
they?
Let's go to their other game against Asian Invasion, where Asian Invasion was going toe to toe with them, and it kind of got me worried. Is Jet Black looking okay this week? Because I think they were looking very sloppy. They almost received a loss against a team that's lower in the standings, which doing that totally risks your whole third seed to playoffs.
No, 100%, and that's kind of where I wanted to talk about Jet Black is, do we write this off as, hey, it was a bad day? Because we all have bad days. Maybe their shot caller wasn't feeling well. Maybe something happened and in one of the people's solo queue games and it just tilted them and the rest of the team was trying to play calm down. What do we think? It was one of those unknown situations, or do we think that we overrated Jet Black?
I don't think it's time to give up on Jet Black yet, but it's definitely, again, like we've seen in the other divisions, this team that didn't look that great still got a victory at the end of the day, but didn't look that great doing it.
Yeah.
So it's really, we got to keep our eyes on them because, let's look at their games for next week, and they play Esports Blue, which is a very important game. And then Recon 5, where Recon 5 is such a strong team that if you're playing weak in a game where you're trying to show that we can play top level, and then get a loss, it's going to only put you farther down. So yeah. I think next week should be very important for what we see coming up for even our bottom tier.
No, absolutely, and that's the weird thing about this division is because we have two teams that are looking down and out in the sense of rated R and team solo kill, but the rest of the pack is all like sixth place and first place they're within 4 games of each other.
Yeah, no, it's very close, and that's what's scary about this. But what if Esports Blue decides to have a 2-0 next week and Panthers Black decide to go 0-2? That's going to change the whole standings, and then we're going to be questioning where we next week again, because the inconsistencies I hope are not coming into these teams' heads, and we're getting some clean play, because we're eventually we're going to get to that point where it's very strict on how many games you can lose until you're out of playoffs.
No, absolutely, and we're with only
to lose to the lower standings is where you gotta stop and watch that game and say, what are we doing?
No, absolutely,
because it's going to be scary when you come to the point where you're like, we need to make it to playoffs.
No, I 100% agree, and I think the bigger thing that we're coming down to is, like you said, is how many games are you able to suffer a loss in? We're coming down to the final. There's 8 games left in the season. It's only a 14-game regular season.
Yeah. So
you're kind of running out of room to make these mistakes. Zephyr Esports and Recon 5, I'm willing to say, if one of them goes 2-0 this week and the other one goes 1-1.
Well, they've kind of locked in those positions at that point, at least to playoffs, correct?
No, they're not locked in yet, obviously, because there's so much that can happen still. But
you're right.
They're definitely in a very strong position for those 2 playoff spots, which then becomes all these teams below them, you can't drop these random games because you're fighting for one seed now. You're not fighting for the top 3 anymore. You're fighting for the 3rd seed. So unless we start seeing Zephyr Esports and Recon 5 just drop games at random,
it's going to get scary for these middle of the pack, lower tier teams.
Yeah, and now the question becomes, we've said Jet Black looked like they were failing this week, while Uni Panthers Gold looked like they were soaring this week. I mean, Asian Invasion, yeah, they had
a 1-1.
Yeah, they went 1-1, but they looked good in their game against UT Esports Blue.
Yeah.
And
So,
even in their game against Jet Black, they look good. So now, does Asian Invasion now enter that conversation?
It's possible. I mean, let's see. Asian Invasion plays Rated R Esports, which hasn't been looking the best. So I think it's definitely possible for them to be playing that game and winning that game. And then they go against Team Solo Kill, so they have kind of this predicted 2-0 next week, and we see where the middle of the pack lies again. Because I think it's I really like having these middle of the pack wars right now, but
the clump.
Yeah, it kind of scares me at the same time, because I'm like, I don't know what to do anymore.
No, absolutely, and it comes down to us. It's our job to say these are the teams we think that have the best potential to get out of the clump. So before we move on to Rated R and Team Solo Kill, let's talk briefly about UT Esports Blue, who, again, as we talked about earlier in the show, are coming off of an 0-2 week.
No,
and
1-1.
No, they went 0-2 last week.
Oh, from
UT Esports Blue.
Oh, I'm sorry, Blue. You're talking about. Okay.
Yeah. So UT Esports Blue is coming off of an 0-2 week, and we talked about it again early in the show about how hard it is to bounce back after an 0-2 week. So what do we expect from them moving forward into this week? Because their games this week aren't really they have the potential to go 2-0, or the potential to go 1-1, or the potential to go 0-2 and give Team Solo Kill their first kill if they're still not feeling themselves.
That's true. I mean, Team Solo Kill still looking for that first victory, and will they get it is the question. I'm a little worried about this team right now. I think they were looking very bad for this week. One of the worst teams that I watched for the whole division of each division in whole, and coming out of what I saw from them and what we talked about from last week, we are really excited to see this team shine and kind of come up big, and then it kind of backfired on us, and now we're looking at this game against Jet Black, and it's so important, this game next week for Blue versus Jet Black.
Yeah, because does Jet Black make the gap wider, or does UT Esports close the gap?
And also this talks about Asian Invasion, who have what we seem as a 2-0 next week, and UT having a harder time getting that. That's gonna even put Asian Invasion above them, and get even farther for them to play catch up.
No, absolutely, and I think that right now we're sitting at the spot where it's, again, let's. I mentioned it earlier. Let's talk about it now. We have all these teams. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 teams. Excuse me, all sitting neck and neck. All within 1 to 2 games of each other. Where who do we expect to come out of this clump with that 3rd seed after this week's performances?
Well,
I think you have to give it to Gold.
Right now, we look at Gold, and even with what they're playing next week, I think Gold at least gets 1 victory next week. From what I can see, because they do play Zephyr, which is a hard game, but they also play Rated R, which is kind of more of a slide game for them. And if they play to their normal thing, they're going to sit 5-2 from what we predict, or 5-3, I'm sorry. And then the other teams, we talked about Jet Black. Are they going to beat Recon 5? Probably not from what we predict. So if they don't beat Esports Blue, they could also stay at 3. Asian Invasion can jump right next to Panthers Gold. And then we've got a whole flopped
Well,
ranking that
here,
we just...
here's my question for you: Is let's say Zephyr. We both said Recon 5. We expect or we don't expect to beat Zephyr, but we're predicting to beat Zephyr.
Mm-hmm.
What happens after that loss? Do they get tilted and do they go boom and Uni Panthers Gold takes the win? There's so many questions.
It is a lot to look at next week, and I think right after because we see Uni Panthers Gold versus Rated R, and we see UT Esports Blue versus Jet Black before Recon 5 versus Zephyr. I think that's how it works, right?
Recon 5 versus Zephyr Esports is the first game of the day. Because Uni Panthers Gold and Rated R Esports and Recon 5 and Zephyr Esports play at the same time. But Recon 5 and Zephyr Esports is going to be the one on stream.
So after that game, we go into the next set. You're right. What's the mentality? If Recon loses, do they lose to Jet Black too? Do they take that 0-2 for the week? Do Zephyr get tilted? Do they take, so...
I think this division is one of the... I think out of the 3 we've covered so far, I think this division's the hardest one to call because there are so many storylines that completely depend on this next week because it's a lot of these middle-of-the-pack teams going up against these upper echelon teams, and then you have Asian Invasion, who we've said doesn't look good against these upper echelon teams, essentially getting two walk-off wins.
Yeah. And so we talk about next week again. They look like they're going to go 2-0 for the week, putting them right back up top with these other teams, taking the spot from UT Esports Blue. And honestly, unless they kind of change what they did last week, I don't see them really even getting a victory. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't see them getting a 2-0 for next week. So it's going to put them even lower in the standings than we would have predicted earlier.
No, absolutely. All right. I mean, let's talk about...
I think it's time to go down to the other... Because we could sit there and talk about the outcomes for the middle of the pack all day.
No, absolutely. So let's move on to Rated R Esports. Rated R, again, coming off of just... a rough week. Like I said, pour one out for the homies, guys. Coming off of the top 2 teams, definitely not what I'd call a confidence boost.
What I definitely, was kind of upset about when I saw this was that when you have this bottom team not doing well, and then they see this in their lineup, the mentality kind of get you into that. We're going to go 0-2 for the week. We're going to look like crap. Our standings are going to be struck. We're not going to be able to make it back up into playoffs. And that's, all of a sudden you get these 0-2 weeks and you're hurting. And if they would have maybe broken this up and had like a different team to play, would they have gotten that victory and then maybe beaten one of these bigger teams when they're fresh in the mind? They know they've kind of reset their mental.
Yeah, I mean, that's the... Unfortunately, though, it's they don't get to make their own schedule, so it's just unfortunate. So
it is.
It
is sad.
This week they play against Uni Panthers Gold again, a top 3 team. But then they also play against Asian Invasion, who up until last week they were tied within the standings. So they have the potential to go, I think, 1-1 this week. But I think right now they need a win. They need a win to bounce back mentally, and they need a win to even stand a chance moving forward to get into playoffs. Because
we'll see
every
if they can
game,
reset mental.
Yeah, every game you fall behind this middle of the pack is another game that you don't get to make up. So I think they need a win this week to really stand the chance at making playoffs at all. And it's so sad to say that so soon. But again, this is a repeating schedule. Last 2 weeks of the league, they're going to be playing Recon 5, Zephyr, and Uni Panthers Gold. So you need to start getting wins now.
It's not okay.
I mean, that's your last 3 games right there, man. That's a rough last three
That is a
games.
rough lineup, but hopefully keep a good mental, survive.
Yeah.
It,
Start getting
keep
wins
it
now.
calm. Keep it calm because when you get it in your own head that you're gonna lose, it's gonna make the team crumble.
No, absolutely. I agree.
We've seen so many upsets. It can happen.
No, absolutely. So let's
And
now move on to Team Solo Kill. Team Solo Kill obviously sitting at 0-6. Things are not looking good for them. Um, and this week they play against Asian Invasion and UT Esports Blue. UT Esports Blue coming off of a rough week. Asian Invasion coming off of a 1-1 week. What do you think of Team Solo Kill's chances? What do you think they need to do to start getting some of these wins?
I think they have at this point. It's again when we talked about another bottom team where you're just getting outclassed. You're getting outclassed in laning phase, and you can't lose laning phase when we're talking about this heavy team play, because when we start to see these top teams just outkill you in lane and use those advantages without actually having to work towards anything, and then they can pressure the other sides of the map without having to worry about it because they know, oh, he'll just get solo killed. Don't worry about it. We're just going to go focus on bot lane, get a double kill, take the tower, and now we have pressure on both sides of the map. That's why you need to really focus on getting your lanes to the point where you're not getting completely outclassed.
Agreed. All right. So we talked about our first game of the week in Recon 5 versus Zephyr. Um, what's your second one? I think you got to give it to Uni Panthers Gold versus Zephyr.
I think that, yeah, I would definitely. But another one I really want to see is UT Blue versus Jet Black, because I think it's such an important game as well.
See,
To
I
kind
thought
of
I thought you were gonna say Jet Black versus Recon 5 because that was my third game to watch. Would be Team Jet Black versus
Well,
Recon
no,
5.
but it's more of I want to see what's going to happen with this middle of the pack, because when we talked about what's going to happen after Jet Black plays UT Blue, the standings are going to go all over the place.
Yeah.
So it kind of lines us up with what we were talking about. If everything kind of goes in the way we said, that's my most interesting game to watch because it kind of lines up the rest of the story for this week.
No.
But I
I
totally agree. Those other games are very important. We're seeing these top teams play these middle of the packs, and how are the middle of the packs looking against the top teams right now after coming out of a loss or a victory against a top team?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we have four games that I think are very must watch, and I'm glad that I think I'm fairly confident in saying it that all of them will be featured on stream. Of course, we're talking about Recon 5 versus Zephyr, UT Esports versus Jet Black versus Recon 5, and Uni Panthers Gold versus Zephyr Esports. And I think, again, the reason we're so excited to see these 4 games is because these 4 games will dictate the storyline moving forward into Week 5.
And even maybe give some chances to those middle of the packs to catch up, because it's all thrown up right now.
No, absolutely. All right, well, we're already at an hour and 20 minutes, so let's move on to Life Division.
Content is content,
No, absolutely. So we joked last week about Life Division needing to be renamed the Death Division because of how hotly contested this division is, and it just gets spicier. We had. Obviously, we're talking about the bet between Go Next Gaming and Sicko Saiyans. I believe my man Alex here had Sicko Saiyans winning this one, and I had Go Next Gaming winning this one. So I'm going to take the win on this one. And obviously, we had the actual bet that everyone knew about.
Someone clip that because I don't remember. So someone find it in last week and send it to me because I don't remember saying that. I don't know. It was, when we said we should change it to death, I didn't mean for the top team to get completely destroyed because that was just not a game I was happy to watch.
No, absolutely. I
It
mean,
was it was sloppy. I, it kind of ruined what my idea of this division was, because seeing that loss really, 4-0 team, who's going to take them out? And we talked about it. They haven't played these middle of the pack teams yet, so where are they going to stand after that? They play a middle of the pack team, get destroyed. What does that tell us? What's going to happen now? Are they going to, go slide down the standings? Or are they going to stay with these other middle of the pack teams that are now top teams, I guess? Because a three-way tie, I believe, right?
yeah, three-way tie at 5-1. And here's the interesting part about what you're talking about regarding Sicko Saiyans. Is guess who they play this week? They play Akuma Blades.
Akuma, which again we talked about this too, and I even said Akuma, I think, takes that victory, and just looks a lot stronger right now, and we'll have to see where that gets us next week, because Sicko has a lot to work on.
Yeah, I mean, Sicko really needs to
They
regroup after that loss. They did bounce back.
They did pick up a game against OTA Glacials. I didn't get to watch that game. Did you see how that game went for them?
I did not, unfortunately. When I looked at the match report, though, it seemed fairly. I'm gonna double check, make sure I don't say anything that's a lie here.
Yeah.
So it was against Glacials. It was a fairly low kill game from the side of Glacials. It was 24-11. All said and done.
So kind of showing that dominance over these lower tier teams.
Yeah.
And we talked about Glacials and how, we really wish they would step up and kind of be like their sister team. And but even their sister team wasn't looking that good this week. So
Yeah, I mean, both teams, I believe, I believe Cinders, we said, went 1-1, right? So both teams, both OTAs went 1-1 this week.
yeah. Did
Which
OTA
is
go 1-1? I can double check that.
yeah, double check Cinders for me. But Glacials did go 1-1 this week. So it's just disappointing in a sense that Sicko Saiyans looked so bad against Go Next Gaming, but looked strong against Glacials, because it tells me that they are the definition of a middle pack team, where they beat these lower teams but they lose to these upper teams, which makes me worry, how are they going to perform against the Kuma Blades?
Yeah. They did receive a 0-2 actually.
Cinders was 0-2. Okay.
Yeah. So, but again, we kind of talked about it. How these, how are these lower teams gonna compare when we have these games come out like this, and we're kind of getting that answer. And Glacials, I mean, they're getting up there with what we would call the new middle of the pack, since we went to a three-way tie now. And that middle of the pack would be Original, Tempest, and OTA Glacials sitting at this. I wouldn't even call it a middle of the pack because it's such a wonky number. But they're in close standings to each other, and kind of how these weeks go will answer third seed maybe. Are these three teams at the top going to stay third seed? There's a lot of questions to answer in Life Division, and we had trouble last week talking about what was going to happen in this division exactly for this reason, because it's so competitive in this that it's hard to talk about it.
No, absolutely. And we obviously just had trouble talking about Soul Division because of this exact same reason. But I'm fairly confident in saying these are the top three teams in Go Next Gaming, Akuma, and Sicko.
I think with the OTA Glacials win, we kind of confirmed it that they're, they do contest with these top end teams. It was probably just an off game for them. We'll have more answers like that next week when we see them against Akuma. Maybe they're going to show a stronger standing.
You mean Sicko Saiyans?
When they verse Akuma.
No. Yeah, but you said Glacials. Well, when you
no.
Yeah,
when I said that
Sicko.
they versed Glacials, they looked like they can compete with these top end teams.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you were,
You know what I mean?
I misunderstood. I thought you were saying Glacials
No,
versus
yeah.
Sicko. So okay, yeah. So you meant Sicko versus Glacials. Gotcha.
Well, when Sicko versus Glacials, I think they showed that they're not, that bottom end team. They can play at a higher level. They don't play middle of the pack, and they just kind of had an off game. We'll see that with Akuma coming up this week.
Yeah.
And what's Akuma's other game against Zero Tolerance, or that was this week?
Akuma last week played.
Also against Original, which is the new middle of the pack.
I would call part of the new middle of the pack. Yeah.
It is part of the new middle of the pack because they are far away from the other two teams, but in close standings to the two above them.
So I'm kind of waiting to talk about a specific game that you've already heard me talk about quite extensively. But I want to make sure we're going down the list here. Obviously, we just touched on Sicko Saiyans quite a bit. But now let's talk about Go Next Gaming, who did take that win against Sicko Saiyans. What did you think about them?
So, real funny. I actually watched the interviews before the match, and I believe it was I'm a rule book. He came in from on the side of Sicko Saiyans, saying easy 25-minute game win. We see a 22-minute win, 23-minute win coming in from the side of Go Next Gaming. Incredible show of control. I love the Heimendinger pick. What do you think about that?
So Heimerdinger did just get buffed recently. I can't remember if it was 919 or 920, but he's looked very strong at Worlds. I'm not a fan of the pick though. I think Heimerdinger is a very cheese pick. It's not my cup of tea personally, but at the same time, I'm very much one of the proponents of if it gets the win, it gets the win. So,
well, I believe this was a flex because they had Ezreal mid and the Heimendinger down bottom lane,
which is what we saw. One of the teams at Worlds, I don't remember which team it was.
Cloud9.
No, Griffin had the Ezreal mid, and then Heimerdinger bot was Cloud9. So yeah, it was. I was thinking of two teams crammed into one
separately.
Yeah. So we've seen both of those picks at Worlds. Again, I don't have an issue with the win. I have an issue with, is it just because, did they get the win because it was Heimerdinger? Because Heimerdinger is a very troll cheese pick, in my opinion.
I mean, I know that when you look at that, but then you look at the other side and they have Cho'Gath, Sejuani, Annie, Kaisa, Zillion, and Zillion being on support, Annie being in mid. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, what were your plans for the draft? Was it run down and then have Cho'Gath tank for the last 30 minutes of the game? You know, like, when you talk about saying you're going to make a 25-minute victory and then you draft a Cho'Gath and a Zillion.
And the Annie.
Well, and the Annie can play rush, and we can see her force fights, but when we're talking about...
Once every 5 minutes, like...
Well, yeah, when Flash is up. Hey, there's Hex Flash. We can see those plays. I want to see Hex Flash. You
calm down, fiddlesticks.
But, why draft? It's kind of confusing. Why draft the Cho'Gath? Why draft the Zillion? What were your plans with that? Were you going to heavy dive or just kind of stall out?
It didn't seem like they had a plan. I agree.
But on the other side, we had such an aggressive style come out. I mean, you had the Heimendinger for more of a defensive core, but look at the defensive picks. We had Echo, Akali, Ezreal, just diving in, and the Leona to set it all up. So
we had a very defensive style versus the very... We had the very defensive style versus the very aggressive style, yeah. So it was... I think it was a smart draft from the side of Go Next Gaming. Don't get me wrong. Again, never a Heimerdinger fan. It's like fiddlesticks to me.
But
It's
it
just
also
like,
seemed
get this pick out of my game.
it wasn't just draft phase. I think it was just they outlaned them, they outmacroed them, they out team fought them. It was just issues in all sides of the game.
No, absolutely. I mean, Go Next Gaming won that game fair and square. It was a very clean game from the side of them, and they deserved it.
Yeah, convincing. I mean, so convincingly that a 15K gold lead is ridiculous. Well, I'm sorry. It should be more like, yeah, it's about 15K. So.
All right, so we've talked about Go Next. We've talked about Sicko Saiyans. We've talked about their highlight matchup feature with the whole bet regarding handing out subs, or not subs, gifts rather.
It was 20 gifted subs.
Oh, really? I got a little legend for it. I was one of the winners, and I got a little legend. So I think it was a mixture of a bunch of things, but I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be subs.
I don't know if you're side betting without me, but next time, man, at least give me a call.
Heard. So Sicko. So we've talked about Go Next and Sicko. Let's talk about Akuma. Akuma coming off of another 2-0 week, looking strong against Zero Tolerance Alpha and UT Esports Gold.
I think UT Esports Gold. I think they had a pretty easy week this week, obviously.
Playing against the two bottom 0-6 teams now.
But again, we're seeing how dominant they are in these games. That it's showing, why they're obviously they're at where they're at.
No, absolutely.
So to not be throwing or looking sloppy is always good, and I hope they just keep it up for next week so we can see some really strong games out of them. I'm excited to see what happens with the Life division. It's a bottle. It's a crazy. Between Soul and Life is just so much craziness. I'm very excited for next week.
No, absolutely. So now we get to talk about the team that I was the most excited to talk about this week. Tempest Rampage versus Original Esports. I don't know if you got a chance to catch that game, my friend. We had a 50-minute
a brawl. It was 60 minutes long, and it didn't need to be.
So I'll be honest, I muted that stream at about, I think it was like 25 minutes into the game. I was like, Original Esports has got this. They're taking in Hibs, like no question asked. This game's over. I muted the stream, and I was like, all right, I'm going to start playing some TFT. And I look over, I'm talking with Alex at the time, and I look over about halfway through my TFT game, and I'm like, what the? Are they showing like replays from this game, or like what's going on? And I see the time, and it's at like 35 minutes. I'm like, bro, this game has gone on 10 minutes longer than it should have. And the team has a Kale, so the longer this goes on, the worse it gets for Original Esports. And I keep watching, and I'm like, this game is the ugliest game of League of Legends I've ever seen. And I've played some ugly 75-minute games before, but this one was just, it was ridiculous. Dude, Riot didn't design Elder Drake to spawn 3 times.
No.
What is going on? Like, one of you two needs to nut up and finish this game. Like, I feel like it's still going on and no one's telling me. Like,
I thought it was hilarious because, he looks at me and he's like, hey, have you watched all the games yet? Are you up to date? And I was like, I'm going to, backtrack and watch a few of them. And he goes, well, this one's like 60 minutes long. And I'm just like, oh, God. But,
I mean, we said we wanted some entertaining games. If you want an entertaining game, I think this is the game to watch. But it's entertaining in the sense of, like, it never fucking ends.
It definitely was a scrap, and it was kind of, I think, disappointing in both ends that we're seeing these teams, especially Tempest, who, starting out really strong and now is kind of looking kind of shaky off of something like this that should have felt a little more consistent for them. Even to have to say this was a comeback for them.
But, I mean, you look at their draft, and again, it goes back to my same conversation that I said with Mediocre at Best. It's all about the draft. And when you draft 3 losing lanes, and in my opinion, a losing jungle matchup, you're just asking to play 60-minute games if you're even going to have a chance at winning. You have a Kale. Like, dude, that's not an early game champion. I mean, I want to take a look at this full draft, and I really want to break it down with you because I know you and me are huge proponents of how important the draft is.
Well, yeah, it definitely looks like Tempest was planning on having a longer game, having the Kale there to have some late game scaling on their
Kale
side.
and Rise.
Well, and then the Rise is a much harder split pusher than the Kale because you're setting up that 1-3-1, but the Kale can also just come in with the team and do a 4-1 because Kale's a lot weaker in the side lane versus Rise being so strong in the side lane.
No, absolutely. I mean,
Kale,
don't get me
especially
wrong,
when you're
Kale's
looking
still a
at-
good split pusher, though.
Well, and especially you're looking at their matchups, Rise completely destroys Syndra late game if she's not far enough ahead. And by the looks of it, we saw Syndra not having the best game, was very down that game. And Rise was having a better game in the side lanes, making a lot more pressure. And then you have Kale versus the Ornn, which, versus a tank, you're going to just kind of smack them around. But I don't think it went in the way they wanted, where they are setting up the 1-3-1 and getting the advantage that they thought they would. And I think they were just team fighting after team fight after team fight because the game looked so scarce for them to come back that they were kind of getting worried and didn't play to what their composition wanted. And those are the things you can't be doing. You can't give up on your composition just because things got a little more tough gold-wise. Yes, you might have to go for a kill bush or, maybe make a decision on trading towers. But giving up on what you kind of planned in the whole scheme of things is, where I say, are they ready to face these top-tier teams with their macro decision?
Oh, no, absolutely. And before I say the rest of my thoughts, I do want to give a shout out to Jarvan in this game. My dude went 0-10. And 0-10 and 27. So he was involved in almost every kill. But dude, you played a 57-minute game and you didn't get a kill, dog. Like,
well, he also was only he only had 15k gold. I mean, he's matching with a jungler, is matching with the support on the other side on original, and it just shows that
he's a very selfless jungler, and I think that's why his team had a chance to come back in that game.
They didn't set up very good with this Jarvan pick to be getting the early advantage that they want, because versing an Olaf, who yes has a lot of pressure over another jungler, but Jarvan's ganks can get so much out of it versus Olaf into level 6.
No, absolutely, I agree. I think that they didn't utilize the pick to the full advantage, but at the same time, again, I think that's props to the Jarvan making sure that every kill he was involved in, he was handing it over, and he was the
600 CS.
Who the
Kale?
Yeah, no, that's actually the record right now in the PRL for the most CS in a game.
That is ridiculous.
Yep. But I mean, again, I think that it goes back to what you said about, you drafted 2 split pushers and then team fought.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get me wrong, Kale was in the side lane a lot farming, but she kept having to come back because of the lead that they had. He kept getting drawn back into these team fights that he clearly didn't want to be in.
Just think of it this way. I mean, the Ornn doesn't want to go hang out in the sideline. He wants getting the whole team knocked up. When you're giving him those opportunities to walk over instead of having to use teleport to save his team in those fights, now you're just giving up all pressure on the map. I mean, it's just questionable play, and I'd like to see better out of one that we consider the highest right now in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. Very disappointing coming from them to see a game go on that long, but good on Original for pushing them that far. I will say that.
No,
I think
that's true, and this is why I've talked to you and I said, Original's looking good. that they're in the middle of the pack because of stuff like this, but they couldn't just pull out that small victory because they still need to work on getting their closing and their macro play down as well, because obviously they didn't set up enough to get the victory. They kind of hesitated on picking a fight, or hesitated on going for Baron, and it kind of hurt them in the end.
No, I agree, and it's so disappointing too because they got it down to just the Nexus.
Yes.
There were no Nexus turrets left, and I will say this: I think the most disappointing thing for me was when a team fight broke out around Baron. Syndra tried to TP
and to close the game.
And I was like, "That's not your job. Your job is to stand in there." And I get it, you're frustrated, and I don't know if that was their call. I don't know if it was someone else's call. I don't know the shot calling situation, but I think that they clearly weren't on the same page as the game went on, because they were getting more and more frustrated with the fact that they just couldn't find the closing blow.
And I think it was also for the fact that they just saw the opportunity and they made a call, but they also weren't in a situation where they could sacrifice all that magic damage. That, I mean, you have a 6-item Syndra no longer in your fight.
Yeah.
That's devastating. When you look at the items she has, she destroys tanks. She's level 18, so she has the W max, which is doing true damage in an AoE form. I mean, you can't sacrifice that much damage. But at the same time, was she having the best game? Was she getting enough picks for the team? Was she getting enough done in these team fights? So maybe it was just a quick decision to say, hey, we might not win this team fight anyway. Let's just try and make a play.
I will say this. I know you're a Syndra main. Now you know how it felt watching Jensen play my best champion at Worlds, and just completely disappointing.
It felt so good. It felt so good because I was like, dude, just will shut him up about the stupid Anivia. every day I have to hear, oh man, Anivia. You know what someone should play? Anivia. No one's gonna play Anivia.
Jensen looked terrible at Worlds on that pick.
I loved it when you were like trying to tell me, oh yeah, Syndra's out of the meta, man. And I'm like, Syndra's out of the meta. They buff her Q.
I told you this like
Syndra's back in the meta.
I told you this like a year ago, dude. Like, she just got back, man.
You tell me it every week when you try and play your Anivia BS.
Alrighty, so let's move on then to OTA Glacials. The final middle of the pack team. We touched on them briefly earlier. Did you have anything you wanted to add on them?
OTA Glacials, obviously picking up a win against UT Esports Gold is a plus, but I still want to see. I still want to see you getting those wins against those, middle of the pack teams, if we're ever gonna say you're in contention. Obviously,
Agreed.
Sicko Sands is maybe not the best team to go up against and say that, but it's still a team you have to overcome.
No, absolutely.
Whether you overcome them now or when you get to playoffs and you have to overcome them in playoffs, you have to overcome these teams.
No, absolutely. That leaves our final two teams: Zero Tolerance Alpha and UT Esports Gold. Zero Tolerance Alpha, I went back and double checked. I can't remember the exact number of them, but they've forfeited quite a few games themselves.
Yes, I think they forfeited a lot.
And again, it's disappointing to see these forfeits coming out. It's kind of put them in a really bad situation. But that doesn't even begin to explain what's going on for like, Jesus Christ, UT Esports Gold. Yeah.
I mean, it's just outclassed, and we've talked about this so many times. You just gotta clean up the laning phase. I mean, you can't. And the big thing too was they were playing against Akuma, where Akuma is such a strong team in that early game, and they use their Jarvan so effectively, and there was so much side lane pressure, so many flashes he got. It's ridiculous. I mean, he's all over the map, making it very hard to play against. So when we say that, it's not so surprising when we say, oh, Esports Gold lost to Kuma, because they just aren't dealing with it. They aren't tracking the jungler well. They're not dealing with the pressure of the early game, and they're not trading sides of the map effectively to maybe get advantage somewhere when they're losing advantage somewhere else.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it speaks volumes too, because we were talking last week about how we really need UT Esports Gold to step up to the level of their sister team, UT Esports Blue. And then UT Esports Blue goes 0-2. So it was just a very disappointing week for the UT Esports organization as a whole. And I really want to see both teams bounce back this next week. That being said,
that would be some story to see the sister teams kind of come together and make an upset.
No, absolutely. But UT Esports Gold, I'm expecting them to go 1-1 this week. They do have a game against Zero Tolerance Alpha and then Tempest Rampage. But I think they need to get that win against Zero Tolerance Alpha. They really need a confidence boost.
We'll see how it sits. It's very important.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about our matches of the week. I think you got to give the first one to Akuma Blades versus Sicko Sands. We need to see how Sicko Sands looks against another top tier team. They did look good.
Questionable play last week. Akuma's looking great. Sicko's not looking great. What are we gonna see here? What else are you looking forward to?
Let's pick our winner for that one first. Sicko Sands, like we said, coming off of a loss against another top echelon
Sicko
team.
Sands not looking so great right now. I have to give the Akuma. I think they're up and coming, huge talent right now. Huge early game pressure. We saw what happened to Sicko Sands when they play against that early pressure. What's going to happen next week or this week? So.
No, absolutely. I'm going to give it to Akuma Blades as well. I think that Sicko Sands really needs to prove to me that, hey, it was a fluke. We lost against Go Next Gaming in such a dominating fashion. We're going to bounce back and we're going to take the win against Akuma Blades. And I think that would be a statement that it was just a fluke that they lost as hard as they did against Go Next Gaming. But whether or not we see that is going to be a different story, because Akuma Blades has looked so dominant in their wins as of late. So the second one, that one's much harder for me. I would actually probably say the game right before it, Tempest Rampage versus Go Next Gaming, because Go Next Gaming again has looked so good this last week, coming off their 2-0, taking down Sicko Sands, and Tempest Rampage. We have them pegged as the top of the three middle of the pack teams. So how do they really stack up against what we are currently calling one of the top two teams in the division, despite that three-way first seed tie?
See my thing on that game is, yes, I was excited to see it, but now seeing how Tempest Rampage look right now, not looking so great. That's why I was kind of more going towards the OTA Glacials versus Go Next Gaming, because Tempest Rampage right now, I don't feel like they're playing at the level they should be, and we might be able to see Glacials, how they're really going to look against these high-level players.
Yeah. I would actually say the same about OTA Glacials. I thought they looked fairly weak last week in their loss, but looked decent in their win. I would, if I got pushed off of either of the Go Next Gaming games, the only other one I would say would probably be worth watching is, unfortunately, at the same time as one of the other games that we mentioned, which would be OTA Glacials versus Original Esports, just because it is two of those middle pack teams going at it. So I think there's a lot of good games, a lot of potential good games to see next week in all the divisions. But I think we both had Seoul Division as the number one division to watch next week. Or this week, rather.
Definitely.
All right, so that about wraps it up for all the divisions. Let's go ahead and shoot it over to questions. Obviously, same as last week, I pinged the Discord right before we started recording to see if we could get any questions. And we do have quite a few.
Yeah, we got a lot of questions today.
So I'm actually going to start from the bottom and work my way up. From Go Next Gaming's Tron, the captain. Why do you doubt the returning champs to actually win the league again?
Now,
because
returning champs, can you shed some light? Because
Go
obviously I was
Go
not
Next
here for last
Gaming
season.
is the team that won last year. They won under the banner of God, I'm gonna get flamed so hard if I can't remember this. Um, oh my God, am I really drawing a blank right now? I'm sorry, Tron.
Well, while
Tron's gonna
he's,
hate me. I gotta look this up.
no,
It's killing me.
I'm gonna give my thoughts right now. We're looking at these teams and we're still
Polar
stuck.
Ace. Polar Ace was the team that won last season, and they rebranded this coming into this season as Go Next Gaming. So real quick, the reason I doubt them is because it's so hard to win back-to-back splits, and a lot of the teams that are returning, and even a lot of these new teams that have come into the league this season, have looked so damn good. And I think that makes it really hard for me to say that Go Next Gaming is heads and shoulders above the rest of the competition. I think if you had said it, if you had asked me who my favorite to win it before the split had started, I would have pegged Go Next Gaming. But the fact that now we're seeing all these teams contending at such a high level across all these divisions, I think it becomes so hard to say that they're the clear runner or the clear team to take the championship.
I mean, based on what we saw from last week, it kind of seemed like a knockout. So I don't know now. Now, I mean, we saw what the returning champs can do to the top undefeated team and knock them down. So it's possible. I'm not giving any doubt to them yet, but I'm still being careful about what I say until we get to those later stages,
The
closer to
playoff matches,
playoffs.
yeah.
Because I think once we get down to these last few weeks, you're going to have those teams kind of stressing over those last final wins, and maybe some of these teams who are less stressed coming in from being locked into their positions. So we'll see how it all ends up.
No, absolutely. Up next, so this is more of a meta question. If you had to pick between Kaisa and Zaya, which would you pick?
I mean that's just composition wise. I personally like Zaya. I feel like she gets out of tight situations really well. You can also risk them to either pick the Rakan or you take it for yourself and have a power pick, and then you're kind of getting something strong. And she still works well with the Nautilus, which you could take away from the Kaisa lane. What are your thoughts, Jacob?
I mean, so I play AD carry, obviously quite a bit. So it's hard for me to say. I'm not known for my play on either one of them. You know me as much more of a stationary player in the sense of like I'm good with Jinx, I'm good with Caitlyn, I'm good with those style of champions. Just based off of pick rate and win rate on this patch, I would say Zaya. Because if you look right now, Kaisa has something like a 49% pick rate on this patch, that's an insane pick rate. Don't get me wrong, but her win rate right now is only 45%. And I get it, a lot of bad players are picking her, and it's bringing down the win rate. Versus Zaya, I believe, had like something like I think it was like a 22% pick rate, and was sitting at like a 51% win rate. So you're still seeing bad players pick Zaya as well, but they're at least winning more often. But again, the pick rate on Kaisa is just so insane that it's so hard to say how much of her win rate is really being dragged down by these bad players, for lack of a better word.
Well, I mean, without bad players, what are your thoughts on? Because I mean, not looking at the win rate per se, but to look at how they fit into the meta. Which one do you think sits in the meta better right now?
I would probably say Zaya.
Obviously, they're both like huge picks for the meta, so I'm.
No, I got you. I would probably say Zaya, simply because Zaya, the meta, it doesn't really have a lot of tanks right now. And if you were to ask me which one I think is better at tank busting, I would, in or in a tank busting meta rather, I would gladly say Kai'Sa. I think Kai'Sa is heads and shoulders above most AD carries when it comes to her mobility, her ability to shut down these huge beefy front lines. But Xayah is just so safe against all these power picks, like the Syndra, for example. You press R against a Xayah and she just goes up in the air. Congratulations, you've just wasted your ult. You know what I mean? So I think I would take Xayah just because I think she is much more plug and play versus the Kai'Sa. I feel like we're seeing that she can't be picked in every sense because of how low her win rate is, because she just doesn't do well into certain matchups and compositions.
I think that about covers it for the
for that question. Yeah. Up next, what is your favorite team to watch in each division? That's a tough one.
There's a lot of good teams to watch. That's the thing.
So let's start with Life Division. I think it's fairly obvious you gotta go with Go Next Gaming or Akuba Blades.
So I'm gonna give it to Go Next off of their amazing highlight reel victory. They put up a great show for people to watch. I think they drafted somewhat of a fun comp at the time, also being very serious about it. So for me, that was very entertaining to watch.
Gotcha. I think I'll join you on the Go Next Gaming train. I think Go Next Gaming has looked good in their wins, and I think that it was they definitely put on a clinic of a show, and it was a good watch. So up next, Soul Division. I think we'll agree on this one too. I think we got to give it to Recon 5 in Soul Division.
I mean, it's still that battle between Recon 5 and Zephyr because they're both still undefeated, and you just really want to watch the game because you want to see how they're stacking up. Are they going to keep it going?
Yeah. No,
and obviously they both are slotted for one of the biggest games next week anyway. So I'm going to give it a 50-50 on that one.
I heard. Take the easy answer. I got you. Up next is going to be Body Division. Again, I think this is a pretty cut and dry. It's got to either go to Essentia Storm or SPK Embers. I think Essentia Storm is funner to watch because or more fun rather to watch because you don't know what to expect on the day. You don't know
who's gonna 7-0.
Yeah, you don't know. You don't know what you're gonna get out of Essentia Storm on any given day versus SPK Embers. They're 7-0. They look so dominant.
And I think I think when watching Essentia Storm, which makes it so enjoyable for me, is that I know they're gonna make mistakes, and I think that's great because I still want you to make mistakes and learn from your mistakes, and show that every team can get to this point. But it's overcoming that, and now that they've overcome their mistakes from earlier on, and they're kind of showing that they're really a team to face, is why it's so interesting for me.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%.
I'm sorry if my answer put you to sleep. Cool, man.
No, we're just hitting the 2-hour mark, bud.
Yeah. Are we really?
Yeah. So what do you think about the only other team that is really worth, I think, mentioning as a fun team to watch would be SPK Embers. How do you which of the two do you think is more fun to watch?
For me right now, it's Essentia Storm. Obviously SPK is doing amazing in their standings, but I gotta give it to Essentia.
I agree, just because, like you said, they do make mistakes, and it's fun to see how they overcome those errors that they do make. Up next is Mind Division. This is a tough one. I kind of want to meme and say Dawn Revenant, just because you never know if they're going to get a 9k gold lead and lose it, but I would honestly, without all meme answers aside, I would probably take either Famous or I'd actually say either Famous or Uni Panthers. I don't find Team Fish Taco all that fun to watch. Just because it looks, there's never a moment where I'm like, oh, what's gonna happen next? Yeah,
they're too clean.
It's fairly game's
But
over.
at the same time, when I was first watching, for the first couple weeks, and I was watching them, and I was like, man, they're just playing so clean League of Legends. It's just interesting to me that a team, is playing like such a style that's
Yeah,
so clean that they're actually making it possible to do this. So I don't know. At the same time, I got to give it credit for what it's doing.
gotcha. So you're taking Team Fish Taco in
I'm
this?
Team Fish.
All right. I am going to go with one more question.
Oh, actually, I want to do this one because this one's really interesting. What
We'll take two more
matchups?
questions then. We'll take two more. This one and then my one.
What matchups do you want to see come playoffs? What matchups between divisions? Because this is something that we haven't talked at all. Is when these bigger teams that we kind of have predicted to get out face each other. What are we gonna see?
Yeah, I mean, so how do you want to go about this? Do you want to just take the top two that we think no matter what are locked in, or do we want
So
to even take the top three from each division as they are now and say where do we think these
let's
ones
take
are
the
going to
top
match up?
two right now because that's easier for us to kind of look at with how the standings are.
Okay.
Um, and then from those top two, let's kind of look at what our thoughts on if these teams kind of match up, or even to take the top teams right now and talk about how they would match up against some other teams, like SPK Embers, for example. How are they going to match up against, Go Next Gaming or Akuma?
Well, I think we've talked about how clean SPK Embers is. I wouldn't actually even put them against one of those two explosive teams. I'd put them against Team Fish Taco, the other team that we've talked about how clean they look. What does
Well,
it
I mean,
look?
we don't really choose where they go. We don't know who's going to play what.
No. I understand that. I'm saying like we don't know what matchup are we most excited to see. I would actually say the two teams that just so far have really put on a clinic in their divisions and haven't shown a lot of weaknesses. I would say I would take SPK Embers and Team Fish Taco because it's two very controlled, two very
Yeah.
manipulative styles that are just about punishing your opponent's mistakes and seeing how they go up against. I think it's either going to be a barn burner or it's going to be a snooze fest. And I think that these teams are as controlled as they are and as egotistical as these two teams are. I would say it's going to end up being a barn burner.
Hmm.
What about you? What would be your playoff match that you would love to see happen?
Oh man. See, I really want to see Embers versus Recon 5, right? Because they just I just like SPK's style
Mhm.
and their drafting, and I think Recon also has a great drafting phase, and fighting between good drafts is so important. And I think that's why it's such a great matchup. And in a best of 5 situation, what's going to happen in the draft phase.
No, absolutely. That's the interesting thing about best of fives is people always forget about how much adaptability there is available to everyone in the best of five stage, and it's why it's so unpredictable for these best of fives for who's going to end up taking it.
All
And
right,
I think that
what was the last question you had?
last question I have is who is your dark horse for each division? Meaning,
Ah,
meaning teams in the bottom half that we think can
yeah.
catapult and get into playoffs.
Now I know we've talked about this in the divisions kind of on our own, but to kind of clarify it for everybody, um, I know we kind of talked about Uni Panthers purple. They already kind of did this for this week, but we still see them, overcoming maybe these better teams, Team Fish Taco, Famous Gaming. I think Panther Purple has a really good chance in the mine division to even overcome maybe one of these top echelon teams.
But while I'm saying like five and below, who do you think stands the chance to?
I still think new meta shows good signs,
Gotcha.
but at the same time,
They got a long road to
it's
climb.
it's a long road to follow.
Yeah.
So we'll keep it at that 5 and below and see what we can get out of that.
All right. So new meta would be
Moving
our
on
5 and
to
below, and then Uni Panthers purple, who was below the bottom half, who did catapult up, was our dark horse as of last week. But now that they've skyrocketed, obviously we're going with another dark horse. So let's go to body division. From body division, your bottom 5 are Insanity,
Insanity.
Kevin, mediocre at best. And you know what? Because there's only 7 teams in this one, we'll take Grim Legion Havoc as 1-2 because there is no.
Well, obviously we've talked about Grim Legion Havoc. I'd actually rather keep them out because we know they're a really good team. They just had to forfeit one game and had a big game against SBK, so I wouldn't really want to put them into that dark horse situation.
Gotcha.
So, but for me, Insanity is looking extremely strong right now. They just came off of a 2-0. So I still think that they have a chance to make it. You know, there's plenty of games to play, and they're not far away, especially from third tier.
No, I agree. I would probably say Insanity Gaming as well, just because they are in a situation where they are so close. They're only a game off of that 3rd seed spot, and they did just take down the only other team that they're kind of tied up with in Kevin and Co. Obviously, they lost the head-to-head earlier in the season against Grim Legion Havoc, but they did bounce back in their win this week, getting that W. So, or getting those 2 W's rather versus mediocre and Kevin and Co. So.
All right.
Let's go ahead and move on to Soul Division.
Soul Division, where everyone's in the middle.
Yeah, so this one we've talked about the most. Uni Panthers Gold was the one we picked last week, but obviously now they're in the upper half.
We've been very good at that.
Yeah.
No, because we did talk about Esports Blue as well, but they kind of took a big slope down.
Yeah.
That's why Asian Invasion for me right now is that team to look out for because they are going into a 2-0 week that we predict. And then, depending on what happens with these top teams, scrapping it out next week, we have literally every top team playing each other, I believe, except for Jet Black and Gold. And whoever wins out of that is going to kind of shape the rest of the division.
Yeah, and I think Asian Invasion, who does have a fairly easy week as a result of all these other teams being competitive with each other, definitely stands the most chance to kind of sneak into the upper echelon, kind of unnoticed, at least for this week. All right, so let's talk about the final division in Life Division before we close this one out.
And this one we did go over a little bit. Talked about is Tempest Rage going to do better, or are they going to kind of slope down again? Obviously, I would look towards OTA Glacial. They're still getting those W's, but how convincing are they looking? Not very. So maybe if they step it up a little bit, we'll see a little bit of change coming out of them.
Yeah, I think this is honestly the hardest division to pick a dark horse in, just because it really does feel like we have 3 dominant teams and then 3 middle of the pack teams and then 2 bottom teams, and it's just about who.
I feel like
who's
things
able
are
to
sitting pretty close to where they're going to be at right now.
No,
but
I agree.
We'll have to wait for some upsets.
No, absolutely, I agree. I think if I had to pick a dark horse, I would actually go Original. I know Original did just suffer that loss against Tempest Rampage, but I think if they're able to clean up some of those mistakes they did have, they've shown that they can beat one of the top 4 teams. And I can't go with OTA Glacials, who just looked so shaky this last week.
Yeah, no, I understand. They're not looking the best, but we'll have to see what happens next week. I feel like the Life division's hard to say anything about. It's just such a crazy division.
No, absolutely. Same with Soul.
Whoever did that division, man, bravo.
Heard. Well, that is going to do it for us here at Plays Podcast for this week. obviously, thank you to Alex for being able to come back, or not come back, but able to continuously do this show with me. It's been a pleasure as always. Do you have anything you would like to say before I let you go?
No, I appreciate that we're getting the opportunity to give these divisions a chance to kind of shine in their own light, and I think we're doing good for the community. So I appreciate being here. I appreciate you putting in all the hard work. And next time, let's not do 2 hours.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, congratulations if you made it to the end of the podcast. I mean, props to you for sitting through 2 hours and what's probably going to be 12 minutes as we go through this outro. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you guys so much, and we hope you guys enjoy. As always, if you guys have any feedback you'd like to give, make sure you give it in through a DM on the Discord. He is Slothking, or he is Slothking. I can't point at you.
The wrong way.
There we go. That guy over there. He's Slothking132. There, we got it. I'm PlaysFerDays, and that's going to be it for us. And to all the teams that still have to compete, or that are competing this week, good luck on the Rift, and we'll see you out there. Have a great one, guys.